book of Ecclesiastes, in chapter 2, the writer starts out and he says, "Then I looked on all the works that my hands had done, and on the labor in which I had toiled, and indeed all was vanity and grasping for the wind. There is no profit under the sun." And today, what I wanted to do was talk about what we should seek as pleasure in our lives. I know that all of us have seen and maybe even known people who spend their lives striving to build a fortune, have a better home than their neighbors, whether it's location or size or style or whatever it may be, or who spend every weekend entertaining themselves and friends and on and on and on. And my question is, are they truly happy? Is this truly what they want? What is the end result of chasing wealth? And I have met people like this, and I've seen people like this, and some people, they do good things with what they have, and they are certainly wealthy, and others tend to be stingy with their wealth. Well, let's look back at some of the wealthiest men in the Bible, and these men were very wealthy, and they would be in comparison, beyond comparison of the Bill Gates and the Koch brothers and all those folks that have wealth in this world. These men were very wealthy. If you look, let's look at Abraham. In Genesis chapter 13, verses 1 and 2, it says, Then Abram went up from Egypt, he and his wife and all that he had, and Lot with him, his nephew, to the south. Abram was very rich in livestock, in silver, and in gold. Abraham was a wealthy man. Let's look at Moses. You just flip over to Exodus 2, beginning in verse 8. It says, And Pharaoh's daughter said to her, Go. So the maiden went and called the child's mother. This is when Pharaoh's daughter found Moses in the basket in the Nile. Take this child away and nurse him for me, and I will give you wages. So the woman took the child and nursed him, and the child grew, and she brought him to Pharaoh's daughter, and he became her son. So she called his name Moses, saying, Because I drew him out of water. And in Acts 7, it goes on to say, when he was, 7 verse 21, it says, When he was set out, Pharaoh's daughter took him away and brought him up as her own son. And Moses learned in all the wisdom of the Egyptians and was mighty in words and deeds. You see, Moses, he had the disposal of Pharaoh's household at his very fingertips. He was considered a grandson of Pharaoh. I mean, Pharaoh's daughter raised him as her own son. And so if you look at the wealth that was in Egypt at the time, it was incredible. It was just incredible, the power of the Egyptian nation at that time, and the wealth that the pharaohs that they had, that they commanded. If you look at David in 1 Chronicles chapter 29, verse 3, it says, Moreover, because I have set my affection on the house of my God, I have given to the house of my God over and above all that I have prepared for the holy house, my own special treasure of silver and gold. If we read back to what when they were preparing to build the temple and preparing all these things, it talks about the storehouses that David had and just how incredibly wealthy David was. God had blessed him immensely, and it was incredible, the wealth that David had. And then we look at Solomon and David's son In 2 Chronicles 9, verse 22, so King Solomon surpassed all the kings in earth in riches and wisdom. So if we think about how wealthy these men were, the kings of ages gone by, and the pharaohs and all, it said Solomon surpassed all of them in their wealth. So it was incredible. It was incredible the wealth that these men had. They were, as I step back and I think about it, they were astonishingly wealthy. And when you think about how they, when they built the temple, and how they plated things with gold and the silver and all that they had, it was amazing. So here's my question: Is it wrong to be wealthy? And the answer to that is no. It's not wrong. God himself tells us that he will bless us, and he will bless us abundantly. Over and over, God has told us that. Over and over, God has said, I will bless you. He told these men that he would bless them. And Moses told the children of Israel in Deuteronomy chapter 7, beginning in verse 12, he said, Then it shall come to pass, because you listen to these judgments, and you keep them, and keep and do them, that the Lord your God will keep with you the covenant and the mercy which he swore to your fathers. And he will love you and bless you and multiply you. He will also bless the fruit of your womb and the fruit of your land, your grain and your new wine and your oil, the increase of your cattle and the offspring of your flock in the land of which he swore to your fathers to give you. You shall be blessed above all peoples. There shall not be a male or female barren among you or among your livestock, and the Lord will take away from you all sickness, and will afflict you with none of the terrible diseases of Egypt which you have known, but will lay them on all those who hate you. You see, God told his people, he told the Israelites that he would bless them, and bless them incredibly, and he's done that. And he's done that with us. In Malachi chapter 3, beginning in verse 8, Malachi tells us, and he tells us in there, he said, will a man rob God? Yet you have robbed me. But you say, in what way have we robbed you? And he answers that, in tithes and offerings. You are cursed with a curse, for you have robbed me, even this whole nation, bringing all the tithes into the storehouse, that there may be food in my house. And try me now in this, says the Lord of hosts, if I will not open for you the windows of heaven and pour out for you such blessing that there is no room, that there will be not enough room to receive it. What God is doing there is challenging the people, because they had gotten to the point that they brought God their cast-offs. They would throw a few pennies, if you will, in the plate and pronounce that as good. You know, look what I've done for you, God. And throw a little bit in the plate. Or they bring the crippled animals as their offering and keep the good ones for themselves. And that's totally contrary to what God told them. And God points that out to them right here. He reminds them that he has blessed them. He reminds them that they have robbed him. But he also lays out a challenge for them, and he lays out that challenge for us. He says, why don't you try to give? And if you think you can outgive me, I'm fixing to show you something. He said, I'll open the windows of heaven. Can you imagine that? He said, I will bless you beyond what you can imagine. And some some may not feel like that they're blessed. And we look around us and we see our fellow countrymen living extremely well, while at the end of the month we struggle to pay bills. I think we all understand that. And we absolutely live in the greatest nation on earth. We are tremendously blessed. But think about this. Not all of our blessings are in the form of wealth. Not all of our blessings come in the form of something monetary or material. We have blessings that are untold. We have blessings that are given to us because we're in Christ that others don't have. We are truly a blessed people in more ways than just wealth. When we think that we're not blessed, we look around and we see abject poverty in countries, in poverty that we can't even imagine. And I remember when I was Wanda and I were living in Las Cruces, and we would go to El Paso. We'd scrape enough money together to go to El Paso, and we'd go see my aunt that lived there. And I remember going around the interstate, and there's a point on the interstate when you go around that the Rio Grande is right there, and you look across the Rio Grande, and there's Mexico. There's Juarez. And I remember going through there. I remember it was in the winter, and it was cold. Not maybe as cold as it gets here, but it was cold. And I looked across, and I saw those little ramshackle houses, if you want to call them that. And what they had nailed on the side was cardboard. That was their siding. So when we think that things are tough, just look around. I remember my mother growing up. We would complain because we didn't get something or get a toy or something that we thought we ought to have. And I remember her talking about her growing up, and they were poor. They were extremely poor there in Arkansas. And my grandmother would always remind her and her siblings, if you'll just look around, you'll find somebody that's worse off than we are. And that's really true. That's really true. But it's not all about wealth. It's not all about what we have. But what we do have, it's how we use it. It's how we use the things that God has given us, whether it be material wealth or whether it be spiritual wealth or something along those lines. Let's go back and look at these ones that we talked about. And let's go back and look at where we started in Ecclesiastes, and let's talk about Solomon. And Solomon, if you think about Solomon, and you read about Solomon in Chronicles and in Ecclesiastes, and it talked about all that he had done. I stand in a wonder at that, about how God had blessed him and how incredible that was. Ecclesiastes 2, beginning in verse 1, it says, I said in my heart, come now, and I will test you with mirth. Therefore enjoy pleasure, but surely this also was vanity. I said of laughter, madness, and of mirth, what does it accomplish? And with wisdom, how to lay hold on folly, till I might see what was good for the sons of men to do under heaven all the days of their lives. I made my works great. I built myself houses and planted myself vineyards. I made myself gardens and orchards, and I planted all kinds of fruit trees in them, and I made myself water pools for which to water the growing trees of the grove, and I acquired male and female servants and had male servants born in my house. Yes, I had greater possessions of herds and flocks than all who were in Jerusalem before me. I gathered for myself silver and gold, the special treasures of kings and of the provinces. I acquired male and female singers, the delights of the sons of men, and musical instruments of all kinds. So I became great and excelled more than all those who were before me in Jerusalem. And also my wisdom remained with me. Whatever my eyes desired, I did not keep from them. I did not withhold my heart from any pleasure, for my heart rejoiced in all my labor, and this was my reward from all my labor. If you read that, and you read about what Solomon did, it was incredible. And how he indulged in his wealth. How God blessed him incredibly. But then you read in 1 Kings chapter 11. Then it says, but King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh, women of the Moabites, Ammonites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nation of whom God had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn your heart after their gods. You see, Solomon, in all of his wealth, he indulged himself in these. And it talked about the beautiful mansion, house, castle, whatever you want to call it, that he lived in. Talked about the lands that he had, the silver and gold. It talked about the people that served him. And I think about that, and I just think about the wealth that he had. And then I think about what it said in 1 Kings. And I thought about the warning God gave to his people. He said, be careful. Be careful. And he said, don't intermarry with these people. He said, don't do that. And we'll go on and finish that. It goes on and it says, Solomon clung to these in love, and he had 700 wives, princesses, and 300 concubines, and his wives turned away his heart. So, we're warned in the Bible about being careful who we keep company with. Well, this is another way that God was warning them. He said, be careful who you keep company with. And Solomon should have remembered that. Be careful about that, Solomon, because those that are ungodly, they'll turn your heart away from God. And he warned him about this. So we read about that, and so I thought about what was it that led Solomon away from God. When we're blessed with wealth and happiness, if we're not very careful, if we're not humble of heart, we tend to give ourselves credit for that. And that's what I see with the people that I've been around, people that I've worked with in the past, people that were very wealthy. It was all about what they had done. They didn't stop and give God credit. That all that they had was a gift from God himself. We want to stop and think about that. That what we have is a blessing from God. In Deuteronomy chapter 8, beginning in verse 11, it says, beware that you do not forget the Lord your God by not keeping his commandments, his judgments, his statutes, which I command you today, lest when you have eaten and are full and have built beautiful houses and dwell in them, and when your herds and your flocks multiply, and your silver and your gold are multiplied, and all that you have is multiplied, when your heart is lifted up, and you forget the Lord your God, who brought you out of the land of Egypt from the house of bondage, then say in your heart, my power and the might of my hand have gained me this wealth. And you shall remember the Lord your God, for it is he who gives you the power to get wealth, that he may establish his covenant, which he swore to your fathers, as it is this day. So Solomon, not only was he the wealthiest man in the world, but he was also blessed with wisdom, incredible wisdom, wisdom that was sought after. And we ask ourselves, well, how could someone that's so wise, how can they be duped into giving themselves all the credit for their own wealth? For all that God has given them, they took the credit. I don't know. I always tend to attribute that to a lack of humility. I don't know. I don't know what happens, but it does. And God warns us about that. He says, be careful, and you better remember that what you have is a blessing from me, and it didn't come by your hand. He warned the Israelites, and in this he warned Solomon about choosing a spouse. In Deuteronomy 7, verses 1 through 4, when the Lord your God brings you into the land which you go to possess, and has cast out many nations before you, the Hittites, and the Jebusites, and the Amorites, and the Canaanites, and the Perizzites, and the Hivites, and the Jebusites, 7 nations greater than you and mightier than you, and when the Lord your God delivers them over to you, you shall conquer them and utterly destroy them. We're going through that. If you remember in our Sunday morning study of Joshua, that's what happened. Joshua failed to utterly destroy them. You shall make no covenant with them, nor show mercy to them, nor shall you make marriages with them. You shall not give your daughter to their son, nor take their daughter for your son, for they will turn your sons away from following me to serve other gods. So the anger of the Lord will be aroused against you and destroy you suddenly. The Lord warned him. He said, don't do that. Be careful. Be careful whom you associate with. In 1 Kings 1 through 4, or 11, beginning verse 1, it says, but King Solomon loved many foreign women, as well as the daughter of Pharaoh and the women of the Moabites and Amorites, Edomites, Sidonians, and Hittites, from the nations whom the Lord had said to the children of Israel, you shall not intermarry with them, nor they with you. Surely they will turn your hearts after their gods. And Solomon clung to these in love. It goes on and it talks about all the women that he had in his life, all those that he took. In verse 4 it says, for it was so when Solomon was old that his wife turned his heart away after other gods, and his heart was not loyal to the Lord his God, as was the heart of his father David. It talked about Solomon's age, that when he was older, that these women turned his heart away from God, and you know, with age supposedly comes wisdom, but in this case, Solomon turned his eye away from God, and he succumbed to the wiles of Satan. Is what he did, and Satan used these women to lure him away. And he did. So when we forsake God and follow other gods, we've sinned just as Solomon did. And you say, well, what gods, Bob? We don't get down and we don't worship some stone, or we don't worship this. We may not worship that, but what do we let become our gods? Do we let money? Do we let power? Do we let prestige? Those things can become our gods. In 1 Kings 11, beginning in verse 9, so the Lord became angry with Solomon because his heart had turned away from the Lord God of Israel, who had appeared to him twice and had commanded him concerning such a thing, that he should not go after other gods. But he did not keep what the Lord had commanded. That was the problem. God had warned him. It said God appeared to him twice. And still he turned away. So if we see how someone like Solomon, where the Lord appeared to Solomon himself on 2 occasions, God had given him wisdom that no other has had since, and yet he turned away. How much more then should we strive to keep our faith, strive to hold fast to our faith, to not turn, to not let these other gods lead us away? So we look and we say, well, what's the difference between Solomon and the others that we mentioned early on in our study? Well, let's look back in the book of Hebrews to try to answer this for us. Beginning in Hebrews chapter 11, beginning in verse 1, it says, now faith is the substance of things hoped for, the evidence of things not seen. For by it the elders obtained a good testimony. By faith we understand that the worlds were framed by the word of God, so that the things which are seen were not made of the things which are visible. Over and over we read in Hebrews, and it says, by faith Moses, by faith Sarah, by faith Abraham, by faith Noah. These men and women, they held fast to their faith. And, were they perfect? No. No, absolutely not. They're just like you and I. Sometimes we tend to put them up on a pedestal above and say, well, we can't attain that kind of faith. I don't know about that. I think that they struggle with the same things that we struggle with every day. They struggle maintaining their faith. They're humans. They have the same desires that we had. Look at King David. King David was described as a man being after God's own heart. He described David as a man after his own heart. Did David stumble? He sure did. David stumbled, just like we do. But what's the difference between David and his son? David was incredibly wealthy. We go, like I said, go back to Chronicles and read about his preparation to build the temple. He wanted to do that, but God wouldn't allow him to. He said, your son's going to do that. He was just incredibly wealthy. But David was a man that had a humble heart. I think therein we see the difference in these men. We see that Moses was a humble man. He didn't want to lead the children of Israel. He said, I can't speak. And God said, fine, I'll take care of it for you, Moses. I'm going to let your brother Aaron speak for you. He had wealth. Abraham had wealth. But they were men of humility. They humbled themselves before God. And I think when I look at Solomon, I tend to think that this is where maybe Solomon stumped his toe, was a lack of humility. Maybe it was one of those situations where that incredible wealth enabled him or caused him to think that he had done this by his own hand. I don't know. We won't know. But what I do know is this. Look at the contrast between Solomon and the others that we talk about. These were men and women that held fast to their faith. They weren't perfect. They were just like us. They stumbled. Well, in conclusion, let's read the end of the book of Ecclesiastes. Ecclesiastes chapter 12, beginning in verse 9. And moreover, because the preacher was wise, he still taught the people knowledge. Yes, he pondered and sought out and set in order many proverbs. The preacher sought to find acceptable words, and what was written was upright and words of truth. The Psalms, when we read those, they give us such an incredible insight to how we should act and how we should walk. And many of those that were written by Solomon. The words of the wise are like goads, and the words of scholars are like well-driven nails, given by one shepherd. And further, my son, be admonished by these. Of making many books there is no end, and much study is wearisome to the flesh. Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God and keep his commandments, for this is man's will. For this is man's all. For God will bring every work into judgment, including every secret thing, whether good or evil. We're going to touch on that a little bit in our lesson in a bit. We've briefly examined the lives of some very wealthy people, people that God blessed immensely, and it was God's blessing that they enjoyed the wealth and the pleasures that brings wealth. The difference between them and Solomon, those men like Moses and Abraham, the difference is that they continued to hold steadfast to their faith, and they didn't let a pursuit of pleasure and money stand between them and God. I think about that, and we think, we tend to make those men and women of centuries gone by, we tend to put them on a pedestal and think, well, we can't achieve that. Well, we can. It just said right here that they held to their faith. They held fast to their faith. That's what they did. By faith, Abraham. By faith, Sarah. By faith, Noah. They held to their faith. So when we let our faith go, when we let it slip, when we let Satan just plant that little bitty seed of doubt in our mind, that's how he'll destroy our faith. Well, we're out of time this morning, so thank you for coming, and thank you for hearing.